MrBeast disguises as a homeless man and is humiliated in front of his own hotel. The ending is unbelievable. The bustling streets of New York City were alive with energy as Jimmy Donaldson, better known to millions as MrBeast, stepped out of his luxury hotel on Fifth Avenue. The towering skyscrapers loomed above him, their glass facades reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Tourists snapped photos, businessmen hurried to meetings, and street vendors called out to passers-by, hawking everything from hot dogs to handmade jewelry. But Jimmy wasn't here for sightseeing or business. Today, he had a very different mission in mind. One that would test not only his generosity, but also his faith in humanity. For months, Jimmy had been hearing stories about the struggles faced by homeless individuals in major cities like New York. Despite the city's wealth and resources, countless people lived on the streets, often ignored or mistreated by those around them. It was a harsh reality that weighed heavily on Jimmy's conscience. "I want to understand what it's really like," Jimmy told Chandler, his business partner, earlier that day. "Not just from interviews or documentaries, but firsthand." Chandler raised an eyebrow. "You mean go undercover?" Jimmy nodded. "Exactly. If I can experience even a fraction of what they go through, maybe I'll find a way to make a real difference." So, after hours of preparation, Jimmy transformed himself into someone almost unrecognizable. He swapped his designer clothes for tattered jeans and a stained hoodie, smeared dirt on his face and hands, and tucked his signature blonde hair under a worn-out cap. A scruffy beard completed the disguise. Standing in front of the mirror, Jimmy barely recognized himself. "This is going to be intense," he muttered, adjusting the cap one last time. With a deep breath, he stepped outside and began walking down the busy avenue. At first, no one paid much attention to him. People rushed past, their eyes glued to their phones or fixed straight ahead. But as Jimmy approached the entrance of his own hotel, the very building he'd walked out of just minutes ago, he decided to sit down on the curb, clutching a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry and homeless. Anything helps." It didn't take long for reactions to start rolling in. A young woman in high heels glanced at him briefly before averting her gaze, pretending not to notice. A businessman sidestepped him entirely, muttering something about scammers under his breath. Even a group of tourists posing for photos nearby seemed to deliberately frame their shots so Jimmy wouldn't appear in the background. Each dismissal stung more than Jimmy expected. Sure, he'd anticipated indifference, but experiencing it firsthand was far more painful than he'd imagined. Then came the humiliation. A valet attendant from Jimmy's hotel, a man who had greeted him warmly just hours earlier, walked over and sneered. "Hey, buddy, you can't sit here," the attendant said sharply. "This is private property." Jimmy looked up, feigning confusion. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I was just trying to rest for a bit." "Well, move along," the attendant snapped, gesturing toward the alleyway behind the hotel. "Go bother someone else." The words hit Jimmy like a punch to the gut. This was his hotel, the place where he'd stayed during countless trips to the city. Yet here he was, being treated like an inconvenience, a problem to be swept away. As he reluctantly stood up and shuffled toward the alley, Jimmy couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his two identities. Just hours ago, he'd been welcomed with open arms, treated like royalty. Now he was invisible, dismissed, judged, and humiliated simply because of how he looked. But the worst moment was yet to come. Later that evening, as Jimmy sat slumped against a dumpster in the dimly lit alley, a couple exited the hotel through a side door. They were dressed impeccably, her in a sleek evening gown, him in a tailored suit, and clearly enjoying a night out. As they passed Jimmy, the man paused and reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled dollar bill. "Here, he said condescendingly, tossing the money at Jimmy's feet without making eye contact. "Buy yourself a meal." His date giggled nervously, clutching her purse tighter as they hurried away. Jimmy stared at the single dollar lying on the ground, anger and sadness swirling inside him. He wanted to shout, to reveal who he really was, to show these people that homelessness wasn't a choice, but a circumstance. But instead, he stayed silent, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Because this wasn't about him. It was about everyone else who endured this treatment every single day, not as part of an experiment, but as a reality. And Jimmy knew he couldn't walk away unchanged. The night grew colder as Jimmy huddled in the alleyway, his hoodie offering little protection against the biting wind. The bright lights of Fifth Avenue felt worlds away from the shadows where he now sat. His stomach churned, not just from hunger, but from the raw emotions coursing through him. Each passing stranger seemed to reinforce the same painful truth. When you're homeless, society doesn't see you as a person. You become invisible, dismissed as part of the urban landscape, a problem to be ignored or avoided. As the hours dragged on, Jimmy began noticing patterns in how people reacted to him. Some walked by without a second glance, their expressions blank. Others gave fleeting looks of pity, but never stopped. A few muttered insults under their breath, blaming him for his situation as if it were entirely his fault. But amidst the indifference, there were moments of unexpected kindness. A young boy, no older than 10, broke away from his parents' grip and approached Jimmy cautiously. In his small hand, he held a granola bar. "For you," the boy said shyly, placing the snack at Jimmy's feet before scurrying back to his family. Jimmy's throat tightened as he watched the child rejoin his parents, who exchanged embarrassed glances before hurrying off. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense weight, a reminder that compassion could still exist, even in the most unlikely places. Later, an elderly woman pushing a shopping cart stopped beside him. Her clothes were worn, her face lined with age, yet her eyes sparkled with warmth. "You look like you've had a rough day," she said softly, crouching down to meet his gaze. "Here, take this." She handed him a thermos filled with hot soup. Jimmy hesitated, overwhelmed by her generosity. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. The woman smiled sadly. "We take care of each other out here. That's all we've got." Her words lingered in Jimmy's mind long after she disappeared into the crowd. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to live on the margins, to rely solely on the kindness of strangers while facing constant judgment and rejection. But as dawn approached, Jimmy encountered a situation that would test his resolve even further. A group of teenagers emerged from a nearby club, laughing loudly and stumbling as they made their way toward the alley. When they spotted Jimmy sitting alone, one of them smirked. "Look at this loser," the teen sneered, kicking over a nearby trash can. "Probably too lazy to get a job." His friends joined in, hurling insults and taunting Jimmy with cruel laughter. One of them even threw an empty soda bottle at him, narrowly missing his head. Jimmy clenched his fists, fighting the urge to retaliate. He wanted to stand up, to reveal his true identity and shut them down, but doing so would defeat the purpose of his experiment. Instead, he forced himself to remain still, absorbing the humiliation silently. When the teens finally wandered off, Jimmy let out a shaky breath, tears threatening to spill over. This wasn't just about him anymore. These experiences weren't unique to him. They happened daily to countless individuals living on the streets. Determined to turn his pain into action, Jimmy decided to dig deeper. Early the next morning, he ventured beyond the alley, exploring areas of the city known for higher concentrations of homelessness. What he found shocked him. In a park not far from his hotel, dozens of people slept on benches or beneath makeshift tents. Some begged for spare change, while others simply stared into space, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Among them was a man named Marcus, who introduced himself as a former construction worker who'd fallen on hard times after an injury left him unable to work. "I used to have a home, a family," Marcus explained, his voice tinged with regret. "But once I lost my job, everything fell apart. My wife left me, my kids stopped calling. Now I'm stuck out here, trying to survive day by day." Marcus's story resonated deeply with Jimmy. It was a stark reminder that homelessness wasn't always a result of poor choices. It often stemmed from circumstances beyond someone's control. Inspired by what he'd learned, Jimmy returned to his hotel later that afternoon, slipping inside through a service entrance to avoid drawing attention. Once in his room, he immediately called Chandler. "We need to do something big," Jimmy said firmly. "Something that will shine a light on these issues and force people to pay attention." Chandler didn't hesitate. "What do you have in mind?" Jimmy outlined his plan, a massive initiative aimed at addressing homelessness in New York City. It would include funding for affordable housing projects, partnerships with local shelters to provide job training and mental health resources, and a viral video campaign to raise awareness and funds. But there was one key element missing: an unforgettable climax that would drive the message home. And Jimmy already knew exactly how to deliver it. The next morning, Jimmy stepped back onto the streets of New York, not as a homeless man this time, but as himself. His disguise was gone, replaced by his signature clean-cut appearance and confident demeanor. Yet the weight of what he'd experienced lingered in his eyes, visible to anyone who looked closely enough. He returned to the alley behind his hotel, where he'd spent the previous night enduring humiliation and rejection. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A film crew accompanied him, along with several members of his team carrying supplies and equipment. Word had spread quickly among the local homeless community about Jimmy's arrival, and a small crowd began gathering around him. "Listen up, everyone," Jimmy announced, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I can't fully understand what you've been through. I only got a tiny glimpse of it. But I want to help. Today, we're going to do something that hasn't been done before." The crowd murmured in anticipation as Jimmy unveiled his plan. He explained that he would transform an abandoned building nearby into a state-of-the-art transitional housing facility, complete with job training programs, medical services, and counseling resources. It would be a place where people could rebuild their lives with dignity and support. But Jimmy wasn't stopping there. To amplify the impact, he decided to create a live-streamed event, a dramatic reveal designed to capture global attention. Using his platform, he invited influencers, celebrities, and local leaders to join him in shining a spotlight on homelessness. As preparations for the event unfolded over the next few days, Jimmy continued meeting with individuals from the community, learning more about their stories and struggles. Among them was Marcus, the former construction worker he'd met in the park. "You really think this is going to make a difference?" Marcus asked skeptically one afternoon as they sat together outside the soon-to-be-renovated building. "I have to believe it will," Jimmy replied earnestly, "because if we don't try, nothing changes." Marcus nodded slowly, a flicker of hope crossing his weathered face. On the day of the event, Fifth Avenue buzzed with excitement. News outlets covered the spectacle, curious about what MrBeast, the internet sensation known for outrageous stunts, was planning this time. Hundreds of people gathered outside the renovated building, eager to witness the unveiling. Jimmy stood at the center of it all, flanked by cameras and supporters. As he addressed the crowd, His words carried a raw intensity that silenced even the skeptics. For years, I've used my platform to give back, to show people that kindness matters. But today, I'm asking you to step up. Homelessness isn't just a problem for other people. It's a reflection of our society's priorities. And if we truly care about making the world better, we need to start here. With that, Jimmy gestured toward the entrance of the building. The doors swung open, revealing a breathtaking transformation. What had once been a crumbling, forgotten structure was now a vibrant hub of opportunity, complete with cozy living quarters, classrooms, a cafeteria, and even a rooftop garden. Cheers erupted from the crowd as residents of the shelter were welcomed inside for the first time. Tears streamed down faces as they explored their new home, many struggling to believe that such a drastic change was possible. But the most powerful moment came when Jimmy called Marcus to the stage. "This man inspired me," Jimmy said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "His story reminded me that homelessness doesn't define someone. It's just a chapter in their life. Together, we're rewriting those chapters." Marcus spoke briefly, his voice trembling with gratitude. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," he admitted. "But thanks to Jimmy and everyone who made this happen, I finally feel like I have a future again." Just as the celebration reached its peak, an unexpected twist unfolded, one that left the entire audience speechless. A woman pushed her way through the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she approached Jimmy. At first glance, she seemed out of place amidst the festivities. But when she spoke, her words sent shock waves through the gathering. "Jimmy, I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "My son, he's been missing for months. We lost touch after he became homeless. But yesterday, someone told me they saw him staying near your hotel. I came looking for him, hoping against hope." She trailed off, unable to finish. Jimmy froze, his mind racing. Then, turning to the crowd, he asked, "Does anyone know who she's talking about? Please, if you've seen him, let us know." For a tense moment, no one responded. Then, from the back of the room, a young man stepped forward hesitantly. His clothes were ragged, his hair unkempt, but his resemblance to the woman was undeniable. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman gasped, rushing toward him and pulling him into a tight embrace. Sobs echoed through the space as mother and son reunited, surrounded by cheers and applause. Jimmy watched the scene unfold, his own eyes brimming with tears. In that moment, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about buildings or programs. It was about reconnecting humanity, about reminding people that every individual has value, worth, and potential. And as the sun set over New York City, casting a golden glow over the newly transformed shelter, Jimmy knew this was only the beginning. The reunion between the mother and son became the heart of the event, overshadowing even the grand reveal of the transitional housing facility. As cameras captured their tearful embrace, the crowd erupted into applause, not just for the family, but for the message it represented: hope, connection, and second chances. Jimmy stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion as he addressed the audience once more. "This is why we're here today," he said, gesturing toward the reunited family. "It's not about buildings or programs. It's about people. Every single person deserves to be seen, valued, and given the opportunity to rebuild their life. And that's exactly what this place is designed to do." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd, residents of the shelter, volunteers, local leaders, and strangers who had come to witness the moment. "But I can't do this alone," he continued. If we want real change, it has to start with all of us. So I'm asking you, look around. Who in your community needs help? How can you make a difference? Because kindness isn't just an act, it's a movement. And together, we can create something extraordinary. His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations among attendees about how they could contribute to solving homelessness in their own neighborhoods. Donations poured in from viewers watching the live stream, with pledges totaling millions within hours. Celebrities and influencers joined the cause, amplifying Jimmy's message across social media platforms. But Jimmy wasn't finished yet. Before closing the event, he announced one final surprise: a scholarship fund named after Marcus, the former construction worker who had inspired him during his undercover experience. The fund would provide educational opportunities for individuals transitioning out of homelessness, helping them gain skills and certifications needed to secure stable employment. Marcus stood beside Jimmy as the announcement was made, visibly overwhelmed by the honor. "I never imagined my story could inspire anyone," Marcus admitted, addressing the crowd. "But if sharing it helps even one person believe they can turn things around, then it's worth it. Thank you, Jimmy, for seeing me when no one else did." Tears filled Jimmy's eyes as he hugged Marcus tightly. "No, thank you," Jimmy replied. "You reminded me why I started doing this in the first place. To remind people that they matter." As the event drew to a close, Jimmy took a quiet moment to reflect on everything that had transpired. Standing on the rooftop garden of the newly opened facility, he gazed out at the city skyline, its lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. Chandler approached, clapping him on the back. "You've really outdone yourself this time, man. This might be your biggest project yet." Jimmy smiled faintly, though his expression remained thoughtful. "It's not about size or scale," he said softly. "It's about impact. If even one person walks away from today feeling less invisible, less alone, then it was worth it." Later that evening, as Jimmy prepared to leave the facility, he encountered the young boy who had offered him a granola bar during his time undercover. The child recognized him immediately, his eyes widening in awe. "You're MrBeast," the boy exclaimed, tugging on Jimmy's sleeve. "I saw you on TV." Jimmy knelt down, meeting the boy's gaze with a warm smile. "That's right," he said. "And you know what? You're a hero, too. That granola bar you gave me, it meant more than you'll ever know." The boy beamed, clearly thrilled to hear such praise from someone he admired. "Promise me something," Jimmy added gently. "Keep being kind, okay? The world needs more people like you." The boy nodded enthusiastically before running off to share the encounter with his parents. As Jimmy climbed into his car and drove away, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment, one that went beyond views, likes, or viral success. For the first time in a long while, he understood that true change didn't come from flashy stunts or massive giveaways. It came from empathy, connection, and the willingness to step outside your comfort zone to understand someone else's reality. In the weeks that followed, the transitional housing facility became a beacon of hope for New York City's homeless population. Residents thrived under the program's support, securing jobs, reuniting with loved ones, and rebuilding their lives piece by piece. Local governments took notice, implementing similar initiatives in other cities inspired by Jimmy's model. Meanwhile, Jimmy returned to Greenville, carrying the lessons he'd learned back to his team. "We've done some incredible things," he told them during a meeting. "But there's still so much work to be done. Let's keep pushing boundaries, challenging ourselves, and reminding the world that kindness is the most powerful force we have." His words ignited a renewed sense of purpose within the group, setting the stage for future projects that would continue to push the boundaries of philanthropy. And as Jimmy sat in his office late one night, scrolling through messages of gratitude from people whose lives had been touched by his efforts, he couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, like sitting on a curb disguised as a homeless man, could lead to the biggest changes of all.